class, this is Mrs. Sala. Today we're going to be talking about composition. Composition is how you arrange things out on your paper. And obviously there's a couple of things you can do to create a strong composition and a couple of things that you're going to want to avoid. So I'm going to start off by talking to you about something called the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds, here's my little rule of thirds map, is essentially if you were to divide your paper into 3 columns, both vertical and horizontal, the points where they intersect, where those red dots are at, that's where you'd want to draw your main objects that you want to mainly have the viewer look at, your focal point, so to speak. So generally speaking, if you draw on those points, you're going to create a nice composition. Now, obviously, that's a ballpark situation. We won't usually start drawings by gridding out our picture, but what the rule of thirds really wants you to get away from doing is basically drawing something just smack dab in the middle of your picture. So when you follow the rule of thirds, you just want to off-center your objects like this bottle is. Likewise, you don't want to go too far to your edge as well. So just slightly off-centered usually will follow the rule of thirds. The second thing that you want to really focus in on is how you're using space in a picture. So we have positive space and we have negative space in the picture, and your positive space will always be the space occupied by an object. So like our bottle here is an example of positive space. Your negative space is all the empty space around your object. Okay, so sometimes you're going to have a lot of positive space occupying your picture plane, and that is okay. But what you really want to avoid doing is having a lot of negative space. So you don't want a lot of empty space around your object. And I'm going to show you in a sec what that looks like. So usually having a good balance between the two is a good idea. So again, we don't want to draw something really small and have a bunch of negative space around our picture. We want a good balance between positive and negative space. And then finally, hopefully you've noticed that this is a line drawing. So we, on the last video, talked about contour line, which is a fancy word, fancy way of saying an outline. Composition drawings, or any drawing that you're going to start with, should start with a line or a contour line drawing only. So in other words, we don't want to jump into shading and rendering all kinds of detail. We want to draw out our composition with line. That way, if you make a mistake, you can easily erase it and fix what you need, and also be mindful of how things are kind of fitting together for the whole before you get into any detail work. So your drawing should look like this when you start. Also online is we're going to talk about how to create dynamic lines. And dynamic lines are usually your angled lines. So if you see here, this is a slight diagonal line. A line like this is going to create a little bit more action and movement in your picture than a straight line. So here we have a horizontal line. A horizontal line will give stability and structure to your work, which can be good too. But if you're trying to create energy, and we're talking about composition right now, you want to create some dynamic lines to really help move the eye and create a nice visual arrangement on your picture. So the diagonal lines are a good idea. Also on the subject of lines is showing movement with lines. So you can see these lines are all kind of going in the same sort of direction and they're repeating. This will create movement. So anytime you have some repetitive lines going in a similar direction, you're going to get a little movement in your picture. And the reason why you'd want that is it takes a drawing that would be slightly stagnant and it will make it more dynamic and more lively and engaging for the person looking at it. So showing movement is a good idea in your work. Okay, so I'm going to briefly show you an example of poor composition. This is an example of a picture that is not utilizing the rules we just discussed. It's not a really great composition. As you can see, the bottle is smack dab in the center. It is not following the rule of thirds. It is also drawn pretty small. You got a lot of negative space happening here, which again doesn't create a lot of interest in a picture. It's just kind of boring. And then we have just one horizontal line, no dynamic, angled outline. So it's just kind of a flat, boring picture. If you want to practice anything along these lines in your sketchbook this week, you want to maybe try drawing your grid and just draw some objects on your points here. I do recommend, as we're starting out drawing, that you guys do focus in on drawing things from observation to build your observational skills. So drawing things like things from like fruit or still lifes or watches or anything you have laying on your desk. So good luck, have a wonderful week, and if you like these videos, please subscribe.